Here in the state of Missouri, we are very blessed when it comes to the Second Amendment. For the most part, our rights are very preserved when it comes to the Second Amendment. However, it hasn't always been that way. Historically, Missouri's been pretty terrible when it comes to the Second Amendment. When I was first of age to buy a handgun, I had to go through a permit process where I had to go to the sheriff's station. I had to do a fingerprint background check. And then after about 7 to 14 days, they gave me a call and told me my permit was ready, and I went and picked it up, and that allowed me to buy one handgun. If I wanted to buy 2 handguns, I had to fill out 2 permits and do 2 fingerprint background checks every single time you bought a handgun. And God forbid you actually want to carry that handgun. There's no way you're going out in public carrying a handgun in the state of Missouri back in the 90s. But so quickly things changed when it comes to elections. And now we're living in one of the freest Second Amendment states probably in the nation. But again, how quickly things change when it comes to one election. And I started this video with that story to remind everybody in this country, I don't care what state you live in, you are one election away from being just like a lot of these other folks, a lot of these other Americans who are having their Second Amendment rights taken from them by their local representatives. So this particular video, I want to talk about the permitting process and the second Supreme Court case about the permitting process that the Supreme Court kicked down. And I want to talk about that and why I believe that in 2025, the Supreme Court will be taking up a right to bear arms without a permit case. And I believe that because of the 2 cases that have been kicked down recently. So let's talk about the most recent one, the one that just got kicked down yesterday, January 13th. Now, this one came from Maryland, and this was a case that ultimately revolved around the strict gun licensing laws that there are in Maryland, that somebody argued that it violates their Second Amendment, makes it too hard for citizens to buy guns, requires a fingerprint background check before you buy a handgun, along with training. Now, this sounds familiar. I went through this in the 90s. And Maryland is now going through it right now. Now, this Maryland law was originally struck down by a 3-judge appeals court following the 2022 Bruin case. And of course, that's New York Rifle Pistol Club versus Bruin, very landmark case from 2022, which the Supreme Court said that every American has the right to carry a gun outside their home. So following that case, this law was struck down. However, it made its way to the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals with a majority saying it does fit, and here's the key, within the historic firearm regulations in Maryland. Now, Maryland has historically had very strict firearm laws. Because of that, the 4th Circuit said, well, it fit within the historical context of the state. And therefore, then it made it to the Supreme Court. And yesterday, the Supreme Court kicked it back down to just deal with it in the 4th Circuit. So I don't believe that case is going to make it to the U.S. Supreme Court at all. It's the New York case that I believe is going to make it to the Supreme Court. It's a little bit different. Even though the Supreme Court also kicked it back, we're going to talk about why and why they will, I believe, be taking it up. Well, this one, really the same thing. It's essentially in the state of New York. They were arguing that you had to have a permit to buy a gun, and that it's up to the police department to who gets a permit, who gets a gun. And the citizens are arguing, we can't do that. That violates our Second Amendment. Now, the Second Circuit Court saw this case and put a stay in place with the law. And then they filed it with the Supreme Court. And while it was filed with the Supreme Court, the Second Circuit Court completely dismissed it, made it essentially moot because the state issued that man that was filing suit a permit. So in other words, they were arguing, well, you don't even have a case anymore because they just gave you a permit. So we're just going to dismiss it. That's very significant. And then the Supreme Court then kicked back the case. Why is this significant? Well, because the plaintiff in this case is saying, well, yes, you gave me a permit, but you're still violating my Second Amendment rights because you can take it whenever you want. In addition to that, I'm going to have to reapply in a couple years. So he's continuing to file that towards the Supreme Court. Now, here's why I believe the Supreme Court will take this case and not the Maryland case. They won't take the Maryland case because of what the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals said about it fitting within the historical context. Whereas in this case, just straight up got dismissed. Whereas in the plaintiff is standing there holding his hands going, well, wait a second, why'd you dismiss it? Like my Second Amendment rights are still being violated. You just essentially canceled this case altogether, which clears the path legally for the Supreme Court to take the case. The reason the Supreme Court didn't take the Fourth Circuit and also kicked that Second Circuit Court back is because they're giving the authority to the Circuit Courts of Appeals, whereas now that authority is moot and void. It's completely void. There is no argument of historical context anymore coming from the state of New York. I don't think it's a strong argument anyway, and I really believe the biggest reason that the Supreme Court kicked it back, and here's the problem with kicking it back, is they kicked it back without saying why at all. So you can only make assumptions regarding the Maryland case. They said nothing at all as far as why they were kicking it back. You can only assume it's because that pathway has not been cleared through that Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. Whereas in the New York case now is wide open. The gates are wide open to make its way to the Supreme Court because the Second Circuit, U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals just said, yeah, nah, never mind. We're just going to cancel this one, which opens up the door for the Supreme Court. And that's why I do believe they will be taking this New York case. And here we go again, another, what I believe, if they do, assuming they take it, and again, that's a big assumption. I'm just putting my money on they will take it. I'm not a gambling man, but if I was, I'd put it on they're going to take this one, because the path is open. That it'll be another landmark case, and I believe that it'll cancel out permit to buy, permit to carry from coast to coast. But just like we saw with the Bruin case, as soon as the Supreme Court said that citizens have the right to carry from coast to coast, we actually have less Second Amendment rights in most states because everybody just doubled down on their anti-Second Amendment efforts, trying to cancel out what the Supreme Court is trying to do. So we'll see. If they don't take that New York case, I'm going to feel a little bit hopeless with our ability to be protected from the permit process, denying us of our Second Amendment rights. If they continue to walk down this path, it just really opens up the gates for a federal permit to buy in the future. And again, we're all just one election away from being just like the folks in California and New York and Maryland. So there you go. We got to worry about our other states, even if you're not in those states, because it all affects us, and we really are. Again, my very first 3 handguns, I had to go and do fingerprint background checks for a permit through the Sheriff's Department. And then all of a sudden we didn't, just one election away, and then other states, they did not have to do that 20 years ago. And then it's one election later, now they do. That's how it plays out, ladies and gentlemen, and we have to care about these things regardless which state you're in. So there you go, man. Any thoughts or insight on any of this, definitely put it below. I do want to take a moment, since most people watch the channel, hey, they're not subscribers, click that subscribe button. Greatly increases the algorithm and our ability to get these messages out. That link is also below. But the most important part of this channel, we take prayer requests, so please don't ever hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, love guns.